Everybody, welcome to the Minnesota Vikings. Survived playing against the Carolina Panthers in Charlotte today, 21-13. Matthew Coller here with you. And on location, I did not travel for this one, but Dane Mizutani of the Pioneer Press most certainly did. And, as I was just loading this thing up, I'm trying to think, where's a good place to start? Do we want to start with, hey, they won? The season is back together. They're playing. They're not out of it yet. Still today, they'd be drafting, I think, third overall, but that's not the point. They're 1-3. I don't know what the records are for 1-3 teams that make the playoffs, but still alive. Do we want to start with Marcus Davenport, Harrison Smith looking good, Bryce Young looking very bad versus Anthony Richardson or CJ Stroud and how they've looked? The running game getting going. Jefferson is still ungodly. Kirk Cousins' first bad game of the year, and they actually find a way to get a win. So I'm going to leave it to you, Dane. Where would you like to begin this post-game show?
I think we have to begin with Kirk because Kirk was despondent post-game. You would never know that they just won 21-13. And truthfully, I understand his reaction. He probably deep down knows they are one or two plays away from losing this game. If that go ball to Jefferson, that Jefferson goes superhuman, climbs the ladder, catches a 30-yard touchdown, tells the defender he's too small right after, and then walks off the field without even hitting the gritty. If Jefferson doesn't do that, they might lose on a last-second field goal because Kirk Cousins threw an egregious interception on the opening drive of the game that he post-game could not get out of his head. You could tell. You could just watch him at the podium, and you can almost see his mind working, running through that play over and over and over again. So I think we have to start with him when we talk about this game because I'll tell you what, before I left yesterday, I went and picked up an Ethernet cord from your house, and I said, maybe this is the game where Kirk just throws an egregious pick six to let the Carolina Panthers hang around. It's exactly what he did. And the Vikings are fortunate to come away with this win. And I think Kirk Cousins knows that deep down. So overall, yeah, it counts. They're 1-3 instead of 0-4. I think only one team's made the playoffs starting 0-4. So the Vikings don't have to worry about trying to fight out of that not so good list. But a ton of room for improvement from today's game. And I think it starts with your quarterback.
See, I think, Dane, this is the duality of Kirk, that Kirk over his career as a Minnesota Viking, it's always been the Kirk coaster, where he has a game one week where you think you cannot play better football than that. Wow, that is astonishing. And then the very next week you go, what happened? And I go back to his first year here, where he's playing against the Green Bay Packers in the game that they tied in 2018. And he threw for 425 yards, brought them back multiple times in that game. He was just wonderful. And I was like, wow, I mean, this guy is better than I thought he was. And then the next week they get beat by the Bills, who hadn't won a game. And that's kind of how it felt like this. And Craig in the comments brings up Falcons 2020, where Kirk had started the 2020 season playing extremely well. He had a good game against, I think it was Tennessee, Seattle, and then he plays the Falcons and throws 3 picks in the first half. So we were kind of wondering, would there be a bad Kirk game that shows up? And it wasn't just the pick six. I mean, the pick six was egregious. That was one where you could see it coming the entire way, where you're saying, throw it. Why aren't you? Oh my, the whole process you could see playing out. But it wasn't just that. I mean, really, it was the entire game where the response to the pick six was a 3 and out. And then there's a throw across the middle to TJ Hawkinson that was probably a pass interference, but the throw is late. The ball's not coming out. There's a couple of pressures, a couple of sacks mixed in there where you're saying, hey, Kirk, what's going to go on here? And I don't know how to ever predict this. All I know is that throughout a season, you get about 4 or 5 of these games where it's not a good game from your quarterback. They get a win in one of them, but they had 3 good games by their quarterback that they lost to start the season. And this is the trouble. So when you look at this upcoming schedule, you say okay, Kansas City's going to be hard, but Chicago, all right, San Francisco's hard, but Heck, I mean, Denver you can beat and Vegas you can beat and so forth. But in any game we go into, we're not sure when that's going to show up again. And if DJ Wanham doesn't pick up the football and run it for a touchdown, we're talking about that game being 17-6 at that point, and maybe the way that Kirk was playing, not getting the magical comeback that they got so many times before.
Yeah, and it's good you bring up that DJ Wanham play, because as the Panthers are driving, and like, make no mistake, the Panthers did not look good today either. The Vikings defense actually didn't allow a touchdown. The only touchdown on the board was the one that Kirk threw to the safety. But as they're driving on that possession before DJ Wanham has the ball bounce right into his lap and he runs 51 yards for a touchdown, you're thinking, okay, if the Panthers get in the end zone here, it's insurmountable. But you are also thinking, like, okay, if the Panthers score even a field goal here, like 11 points feels pretty good. It's going to be tough for them to come back against. I guess it would be at that point, not 11 points, but it would have, it felt like that was a turning point in the game, not only because it helped the Vikings jump ahead 14-13, but because it didn't really feel like the Vikings offense was going to be able to get anything rolling before that in the way that, we've seen them roll week 1, week 2, week 3 at times. It was not that today. There was none of that, which is why I do think, as much as I think Kirk deserves some credit for, after the DJ Wanham touchdown, the Vikings force a punt, and the Vikings offense gets the ball back, and then the Vikings go ahead 21-13 on that catch from Jefferson. Kirk technically led that drive, so I guess we have to give him some credit, but that was the running game. That was Cam Akers getting going. That was Cam Akers catching a ball in the flat. I think the best thing Kirk did on that drive, and we were talking to Kevin O'Connell after the game, if you recall the play, Cam Akers catches a ball, gets 9, looked like he got 10, but it's a 2nd and 1 play, and the clock's ticking down. So the Vikings are lining up, and they're willing to let the clock just bleed out of the third quarter, go to the fourth, flip the field. Kirk gives a nice hard count there, and he gets credit for that because he caught the Panthers sleeping. They jump, Schlottman snaps the ball, and then Kirk makes the wise decision of, I'm just going to throw to the best receiver on the planet in one-on-one coverage. So you can give him some credit, but even on the game-changing touchdown drive for the offense, it was a lot of other guys stepping up, making plays. And I think that's why Kirk deep down came to the podium and looked like the Vikings had just lost, because I think he knows without a couple plays coming here and there from his teammates, they would have lost, and he would have been the reason for that.
Yeah, so there's so many things from this game that I just am interested in. And part of it is not just that Kirk struggled, but also when you look at the distribution of targets, it's been the Jefferson offense most of the season. And the idea was that it was supposed to be, all right, Jefferson's going to be great. But I remember going into the season saying, if Jefferson actually has fewer yards, that might be good, because that means that you're getting the ball to Addison, you're getting the ball to KJ Osborne, you're getting the ball to TJ Hawkinson. And hey, that passing game out of the backfield, totally non-existent so far. Hawkinson has not been a difference maker. Today, I mean, Jordan Addison, the best play he made was getting kind of punched in the face as he was turning around for a football, and it turns into a 45-yard penalty. And I'm trying to figure out how also, Addison missed a block where Justin Jefferson got lit up. And maybe that's just not the best play to run with Jordan Addison. Of all the things he can do in the NFL, I do not think blocking is one of them. And so a play might feel good on paper, but in practice, maybe not so much. And I don't think Addison is ever going to be a good blocker. So maybe just take that out of the playbook, put in Johnny Munt. If you're going to run that, put him out there and have him block and not Jordan Addison. But Addison and Osborne have been factors here or there. A big touchdown a couple weeks ago for Addison, a big touchdown last week for KJ Osborne. But for the most part, this hasn't had the distribution that I think we expected. And I don't know how much to put on the fact that it felt like they weren't on the field very often again, because Carolina was throwing 3 yards at a time with Bryce Young on a lot of those drives. They had an 11-play, 30-yard drive that took up 6 minutes. I don't know how that happens, but that but that's been a very consistent theme that opponents know they can stay on the field with these long drives. Still, I have to wonder about why they haven't been able to work the ball to a lot of different places.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that until you brought it all up. But 3 targets for Hawkinson, 2 targets for Osborne, 1 target for Addison. Kevin O'Connell did talk post game about how we just didn't get enough opportunities with the football in our hands. And I think he felt good about the running game. But I think when he's saying we didn't get enough opportunities with the football in our hands, he's talking about that pass game that he touted over and over and over again amid the 0-3 start. So, yeah, I guess if you flip the result and the Vikings lose this game, those numbers look awful. Like the target, not only just the lack of production, but the lack of spreading the ball around to your playmakers. It's definitely something to take note of as we kind of progress to the rest of the season, because you're not going to play the Carolina Panthers every week. You're not going to play a team whose quarterback, the lights look a bit too bright right now for Bryce Young. As a matter of fact, next week you're going to play Patrick Mahomes. So if you want to score with the teams that are at the top of the league, then you're going to need more distribution than just 9 targets to Jefferson and only 3 being the high to anyone else on the team. Also to note, like 6 catches, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns for Jefferson. To me, it felt like he still did put the team on his back because the offense couldn't do anything. But take away that 30-yard bomb up the left sideline, and it's a pretty pedestrian game for him too. So credit to Justin for making the most of his opportunities. But I think other guys on this offense need more opportunities. I just don't know how Jordan Addison can go a whole game with 1 target. I get the game script thing, but it seems like last week we were talking, how does Jefferson go 15 minutes an entire quarter without a target heading his way? I think you got to find ways to get the ball into Jordan Addison's hands, other guys' hands. TJ Hawkinson, the guy you paid, into TJ Hawkinson's hands. More guys need to eat on this offense, at least as far as the passing game goes. I did think the running game was pretty good today with Madison and Akers looking like a pretty good 1-2 punch for the Vikings.
I definitely want to get into the defensive side because there's a real talk about like duality of feelings there. Like if the other team has the ball for 40 minutes of the game, were you great on defense but I think you were, but I'm not really sure. But just what you said about the running game. I don't know like if the Panthers are just bad or whatever, but I think Cam Akers has some jolt to him. Like we met Cam Akers and my first impression was, whoa, like this guy is yoked. I mean, like all running backs are pretty beefed, but like he's impressive physically. And so you're like, well, this guy has been good with the Rams, so he should be good, and he knows the playbook and everything else. Comes out and he only ran the ball 5 times. I was surprised because it felt like he was getting big runs throughout the day. Madison had a hugely successful day, probably competition based for the first 2 weeks, and offensive line, injuries and things like that. They were mostly healthy today. So they run extremely well, and that's kind of the running that they were hoping for. Okay, that's great. But the right guard situation throughout the game, especially when Kirk Cousins' arm was hit and popped up and threw an interception there, and Ed Ingram was clearly beat. I think Ingram has run blocked extremely well over the last 2 weeks, which may be what's keeping him on the field. I really don't know, because his negative plays at right guard and pass protection have caused now countless turnovers, countless sacks on 3rd downs, ruined drives. And Dalton Reisner is sitting on the sideline still. And when we talked to Reisner this week, it seemed like he was going to play. It seemed like Kevin O'Connell indicated he was going to play. It seemed kind of obvious after the way he had played in pass protection against the Chargers. What do we think happened there with Ed Ingram still playing the entire game at right guard?
I don't know, and I don't know how you could go out of the locker room after halftime and not just say, let's try Dalton Reisner at right guard. Because to your point about Ed Ingram, who cares if he's run blocking well? It looked like everyone on the line was run blocking well today. The Vikings had 135 yards rushing. Alexander Madison averaged 5.6 yards a carry. Cam Akers, like you mentioned, 8 yards a carry. The run blocking was good. And Ed Ingram's run blocking to this point in the season has been pretty good. But we're not talking about run blocking when we're talking about Ed Ingram's deficiencies. We're talking about pass blocking. And on Kirk's second interception of the game, as critical as he was of himself for that first interception that went for a 99-yard pick six, Kirk basically just gave himself a pass for that one and said, my arm's getting hit while I throw. What do you want me to do there? And he has a point. Ed Ingram gets beat clean at right guard. The guy gets home, hits Kirk's arm, ball goes 100 yards into the air and lands right in the Panthers linebacker's arms. I don't know what the plan is here. And I think in the same way that the Vikings need to be like critical of themselves amid victory for not diversifying the targets on offense, they need to be critical of themselves in victory when it comes to lineup decisions, I think, moving forward. I don't think you can just say, oh, we won. We're 1-3. Let's roll into next week with the same lineup we had, because why fix a thing that isn't broken? Because we got the result we wanted. Like, it's still broken. And I think if the Vikings go on to lose this game, you're looking at the right guard play and you're saying, well, where is Dalton Reisner? I think they almost get a pass because we're talking about JJ with the great catch, Harrison Smith. We'll talk about him, I'm sure. Vintage performance from him. Marcus Davenport's back. There's so many things to talk about in the positive that we won't talk about. Oh, Ed Ingram still stinks at right guard. Like, none of those things come up in victory, but I think the Vikings need to be hypercritical of themselves. And like, I just don't know why you bring Dalton Reisner in if you're just going to consistently watch the same thing happen over and over and over again at right guard. I think he will play next week, but I thought he was going to play this week. So who knows?
Yeah, and unlike last week, the TV cameras didn't even find him after the big sack. Last week, there was a sack against the right guard, and the cameras were like, there's the guy who should be playing, but not this time. It is odd. I mean, I know it's hard to come in and learn the playbook and everything else, and I guess maybe they felt like he wasn't prepared still, or they watched the tape back and thought that Ingram was so good at run blocking that they didn't want to make a change there. Also, by the way, this week it sounded like Garrett Bradbury was going to be back, and they talked confidently, and then he's inactive for this game, which it just continues to make you wonder, when will he play? And by the way, next week there's a fella named Chris Jones that I know Taylor Swift is dating, one of the best players on the Chiefs that's not named Mahomes, but not the best, because that's Chris Jones. He is an absolutely monster dominant defensive tackle. And are you going to still go in with one of the worst right guards in football and a backup center? That could be a pretty tough task, maybe tougher than it was today. There's one more offensive thing I wanted to bring up. So the Vikings have a chance to put the game on ice, and it's 3rd and 2. And they've been running the heck out of the football all day long. And Kirk Cousins takes the snap and whips it down the sideline to pretty much nobody. And I don't know how many times we've seen that in the Kevin O'Connell era, that, like, why? I mean, it's 3rd and 2. She's like, hand the ball off, get a first down. I mean, you're dominating them with both Akers and Alexander Madison, and yet they don't do that. I feel like there is something about Kevin O'Connell where 90% of it makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, we should praise Kevin O'Connell for going for it early on 4th down, throwing the ball very quickly to Justin Jefferson. If they punt that ball away and give up another score, I mean, you're going to feel like you're reeling right there, like you're falling. And instead makes a good decision on his own side of the field, which was smart to do. First down, great call. But on 3rd and 2, whipping it down the sideline, like there's just some small things every game where I go, I don't know, man. And maybe they just stand out because they didn't make the play. And if they do, then I never remember it. But sometimes I just can't believe that 3rd and 2 is so difficult for this team.
Especially with the way they were gashing the Panthers and just kind of wearing them down up front. I wonder if it's, man, the passing game has looked really bad to this point. Let's get them some confidence. I think there's part of Kevin O'Connell that, I mean, more than part of him, that just loves the fact that the pass game numbers look good. And I wonder if he's chasing kind of a big play there to kind of enhance those a bit. Because 3rd and 2 at that point with 7 minutes left in the game, another first down brings another 2 or 3 minutes off the clock. There's really no excuse not to run Alexander Madison. I guess he had lost a yard on the previous play, but he had gained 9 yards on the 2 plays before that. So maybe it is a bit of revisionist history from us here, like hindsight 2020. But yeah, 3rd and 2, when your starting running back has 5.6 yards a carry, your backup running back has 8 yards a carry, they're basically getting whatever they want. It does feel a bit like an overthink there. Luckily, it didn't come back to bite them, because here's a good segue to defense, because Harrison Smith just went vintage on the last drive of the game and really kind of made Bryce Young's life a living hell all day.
Yeah, so the Bryce Young thing is pretty interesting to talk about. I want to get to that as well. But let's focus on the defensive side. In this offseason, we spent a lot of time talking about how Brian Flores was extremely aggressive and how this would play to the favor of Harrison Smith. I thought during training camp, Kirk Cousins was downright irritated with Harrison Smith because of the number of times that he was blowing up plays with these blitzes off the edge that weren't being identified. And then we watched the first couple of weeks and they give up 260 yards rushing. They give up whatever number of passing yards, 40 completions to Justin Herbert. And we're going, blitz? Like, what's happening, blitz? Today was the ups and downs of the blitz, the blitz coaster as well, because sometimes you get beat on the blitz and the opposing quarterback has 120 quarterback rating and you lose. And other times you have him in a blender and he doesn't know what to do. And we saw that many times from Bryce Young. I mean, 2nd down and 17 in field goal range, and the dude takes a strip sack that gives away the game. But in part, that's the pressure looks. Here's another like low-key thing that Bryce Young was absolutely terrible at today: checking to run plays. He could not figure out when was the right time to check in and out of run plays. And there were a couple times where he was going, kill, kill, kill. And then they would run right into 8 people. Like, I don't think you understand how to determine when you're supposed to run or pass against this D-line. And then Harrison Smith was fantastic. When he got his opportunities, he made his plays. This is the Harrison Smith that we know. And I think that over the last couple of weeks, well, one, when the Eagles are running every play, it's not a whole lot that Harrison Smith can do to make game-changing plays. Last week, I don't know if he was targeted a single time. PFF had him at 2 targets before this season because everyone's identifying where he is and going somewhere else. But today, getting him to the line of scrimmage, letting him make these plays, they did a lot on defense, including stuffing the run very effectively throughout, that I expected them to do. And I guess it's a week-to-week league for a reason, because the opponent was so much different than Justin Herbert in his prime throwing to an elite wide receiver versus Bryce Young not knowing what to do with football.
Yeah, I think there's probably a bit of a happy medium here, right? Like, the Vikings aren't this terrorizing defense that's just going to make the opposing quarterback feel so uncomfortable the whole game. And they probably, probably aren't the defense that's going to allow a really good quarterback to throw for 400 yards and slice and dice them everywhere up and down the field. I think they probably exist somewhere in the middle. But today they looked really, really good because of, like you said, the aggressive style of defense that we kind of were expecting the whole year. This is kind of, if this was the Bucs game, if this was the season opener and this is how the defense looked, everyone would be like, oh yeah, this is the Brian Flores defense that we were expecting. It took 3 weeks and an 0-3 start to see kind of what this looks like. And again, I caution, it's not going to look like this every week because there are weaknesses across the defense. But this is a guy, Brian Flores, who has pretty much had success everywhere he's gone, minus having the worst defense in the league his first year in Miami because of, again, the talent. But if he has the right players, and he has one player in particular, Harrison Smith, that he can use kind of all over the field in the way he wants to, I think we saw a glimpse today of what it could look like. And it was just a really impressive game from Harrison to kind of dial back the clock a little bit, at least on the surface. You watch the first 3 weeks and you don't really notice him. And then you watch this week and you notice him everywhere on the field. 3 sacks, the strip sack, obviously, that ends up going for the touchdown. basically single-handedly ends a comeback attempt on the final drive of the game by sacking Bryce Young twice. And then hearing him talk after the game, it's all not that surprising because this is kind of how he's been throughout his career. But he's saying that was just an opportunity for me to make a play. No one on this defense has really made a play to this point. It was my turn this week. It might be someone else's turn next week. We have to kind of keep this thing rolling. Kind of modest words from a guy who's never really been one to tout himself. But make no mistake, like Harrison Smith was always going to be a key to this defense. Kevin O'Connell said as much in his post-game press conference today. He said talking to Brian Flores right after the Vikings signed him in February or hired him to be their defensive coordinator. One of the first things Brian Flores said is like, we need Harrison Smith back. And you see why today. So yeah, he was great today. He deserves all the praise that he's going to get. I'm sure everyone and their mom's going to be writing about Harrison, and they should. But I also caution moving forward to not have so much whiplash with this, which is bound to be a roller coaster ride with this defense. They're not as good as they looked today, I don't think, but they're not as bad as they looked last week either.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, it's just going to be talk about a roller coaster. I mean, although Justin Fields played really well against the worst defense in football today, but Kansas City, Chicago, San Francisco, you're facing two of the best 5 offenses in the NFL over the next couple of weeks. But I think when we're talking today, we do have to look at Brian Flores and say the one thing that we knew was that he was going to use the personnel better than Ed Donatel. And Kevin O'Connell, he layered one in there. He layered a little like, yeah, nice to have him being used in this kind of way or whatever. I mean, we all knew with Harrison Smith, he needed to be playing at the line of scrimmage, and he did, and he made plays. And I want to talk about another big player here that Kevin O'Connell has talked about, but that is in a second, Dane, because our show is brought to you by Prize Picks. I don't know if you ever heard of Prize Picks, Dane, but pretty fun. In fact, I went 3 for 3 and had a great day today in Prize Picks. We have a brand new segment each week where I go through all of my picks. All you have to do at Prize Picks is pick more or less between 2 and 6 player stat projections. I nailed them all this week. So you get a number for a player, Kirk Cousins, X number of yards. You pick more or less, and that's it. That's all you got to do. prizepicks.com/purple. You can use the code purple for a first deposit match up to $100. The reason I like it, it's cheap, it's quick, it's easy, and you can turn $10 into $250 with just a couple taps on your phone or your computer. It's great. Prizepicks.com/purple with the code purple. Daily fantasy sports made easy. You know who made things easier for the defense, Dane? Marcus Davenport. I mean, this guy has taken more shots in press conferences of Kevin O'Connell saying, really could use Davenport. Hey, you know that Davenport guy, if he's back, we're better. You have to give it to him. He was right. Marcus Davenport absolutely mauled the Carolina Panthers today.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a good thing obviously it's a good thing for the Vikings because his impact showed all over the field. We asked different members of the Vikings defense what was the biggest thing, or where was the biggest impact Marcus Davenport was noticed today, and everyone kind of said the same thing. Everywhere he was, I mean, he seemed to be everywhere. You saw kind of the vision of bringing him in, what type of player he could be. But I say it's a good thing for the Vikings because like it was like almost this entire time Kevin O'Connell being like, got no answers on defense, but when we get Marcus Davenport back, we're going to be better. And you started to be like, are they? Like, is this just like a scapegoat situation? Like, are they actually going to be that much better? How much pressure are he putting on this guy by like one guy coming back into the mix, turning around a whole defense? And again, I'm going to keep saying it, but like, this is not going to be the norm moving forward because they're going to play much, much tougher competition. But for today and today only, like if we're just talking about that, yeah, Kevin O'Connell might as well have been a prophet saying, wait until we get Marcus Davenport back. It's going to look way different. It did. It was interesting to see the different ways that he showed up. And you could tell, like you go back and watch the 4 snaps he played in week 2 against the Eagles. Just did not have it. He only played 4 snaps on the opening drive. It's very obvious why he ends up sitting out pretty much the whole game. He obviously did not play in week 1 against the Bucks or in week 3 against the Chargers. But watch him this week when you go back and watch the tape, and we both will. They were moving him all over. They were rushing him from the outside. He was rushing from the inside. He was winning matchups. He had a one play where he had a 6 spin move. I think DJ Wanham actually ended up getting credit for the sack. But when we go back and watch that, I wouldn't be shocked if they add a half sack to Marcus Davenport because of the way he was able to impact that play, which ultimately ended with Bryce Young on the ground. He was great today. And talking to him post-game, he's a pretty eccentric guy and really interesting. He was super hard on himself. He was like, yeah, I didn't play the game that I needed to play today. And he was really hard on himself about his conditioning. He said, I need to get my conditioning up so I can be on the field for more defensive snaps. I think he played like 62-ish% of the snaps today or something. I think he obviously wants to be closer to 100. I don't think Marcus Davenport's a situational pass rusher. I think he's a guy who plays every down, and I think that's kind of the expectation he has for himself, at least talking to him today. So hearing him kind of say that, maybe there's another level he can get to. And if there is, maybe the defense will just continue to progress and get better with Davenport on the field. Because no disrespect to DJ Wanham, he had a scoop and score touchdown today that turned the game on its head. But he is not Marcus Davenport. And it's pretty clear why the Vikings went out and got this guy, watching the way he impacted the game today.
I mean, Davenport in 2021 had 9.5 sacks and was graded as one of the better edge rushers in the NFL. I mean, so we know that the talent is there. And when we would watch him throughout training camp and they were moving him around a little and doing different things with him, I mean, I said to Brian Flores one day, I was like, they just don't make guys this big who move this fast anymore at edge rusher or outside linebacker, defensive end. What do you want to call it? Usually those guys are 3 techniques at this point, but he's an outside rusher, and that makes him very unusual. He is a legitimate weapon. It's just that the whole thing about the defense in general is one layer down. They have everybody healthy. One layer down, it's not good on the defense. But if everyone is healthy like they were today, they can get after the passer with their rushers. I mean, there was a really big play by Danielle Hunter where he got held, which I wish was a stat, like how many holdings a defensive lineman causes, because Danielle Hunter has caused many over the years. And that was a big play because that took them back. But at the same time, Bryce Young's got the ball with a chance to win the game, or not win the game, but tie the game at the end. He drives down, he makes some good throws, makes some good plays. Yes, Harrison Smith comes up with those sacks, but even as they were having a really good day in a lot of areas, Carolina was able to hold on the ball in a very similar way that the Tampa Bay Bucks did in week 1, where sometimes, I mean, Baker Mayfield didn't look great, but here's like a first down, 6-yard completion, 4-yard completion, 3-yard completion, 7-yard completion. And I was looking and it felt so weird. This is probably the strangest like box score versus what I saw is 25 for 32, 78% completion percentage for Bryce Young. And I thought he was lost. I thought that the whole game he looked completely clueless. 6.4 yards per attempt, was sacked 5 times. It's a very strange game to try to evaluate from him. But we have to credit the fact that Bryce Young, they did not trust him. They didn't trust the offensive line to give him any time to throw. He got passes batted down. He didn't look like he could see very well, which I think is a huge problem for his height. Also, I just would implore Panthers fans not to look at what happened with CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson today. It's always going to be a little weird that they picked a guy that small over 2 other guys who are much bigger, but he did not look like a number 1 overall pick to me. He looked like a backup level quarterback that I think helped the Vikings a ton on defense, despite the fact that they were out there for a long time.
Yeah, he was seeing ghosts. And actually, the fact that you bring up that he ended up completing 78% of his passes is unfathomable to me watching him in person today. I guess it's easy when I don't know what his average depth of target is, but he was throwing a lot of quicks to the running back, little swing passes here, underneath routes here, check downs there. So maybe that just obviously pads the stats, the completion percentage in the positive. He looked lost today, and I I hesitate to say bust, and but it so early. We're a month into this kid's career, a lot of ramp way to go, but it doesn't look good when you have CJ Stroud dominating for the Houston Texans in a way that I don't think anyone expected the Texans to be competitive this year, let alone be a team that can hang 30 on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And now they're sitting at 2-2. Anthony Richardson did something very similar today. They end up losing in overtime, but he brings the team back from pretty much the depths of defeat with the 15 points unanswered in the fourth quarter, and forces overtime, and he looks dynamic and all these things. Yeah, I would be a little bit concerned about Bryce Young if the Vikings defense, which hasn't been all too impressive to this point, was able to fluster him in the way that they were today. So, yeah, it wasn't good. I don't know what else to say when it comes to him. I will say I want to give him more time, but the knock was he's too small to play quarterback in the NFL. There aren't a lot of short guys who have done it at the quarterback position. Is he going to be added to that list of guys who didn't do it? We'll see. But he looked really bad today.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a reason for that. And Russell Wilson probably weighs about 40 more pounds than Bryce Young does. He's so slender. He got hit one time and I thought, oh, that might be it, just because he had to take a hit. And when you see how big the defenders are versus him, it's a concern. And also, hey, great lesson that cognition tests and draft analysts who tell you that Anthony Richardson can't throw. There's a lot of NFT salesmen who are reporting on the draft or pretending that they're draft analysts who don't know what they're doing and are selling you on a heap of BS every year. So just something to remember during the next draft season. But, we'll, talk about that another day. When it comes to Bryce Young, it's being said in the comments, and I saw it on Twitter throughout the day, that if Andy Dalton plays, the Vikings are 0-4. I have a very tough time disagreeing with that, because Andy Dalton is a competent NFL quarterback who's really good at getting the ball out quickly and not taking sacks and not making massive mistakes. And that was what really gave the Vikings the game. I mean, 5 sacks, one of them ends up going for a touchdown. So the people in the comments who are not that impressed by the win, which I'm not either. I mean, the headline to my instant reaction was bailed out, because I think that they bailed him out. But we have reached the point in the podcast, Dane, where we talk about what it all means to now be 1-3. And it means that your season is alive. And I saw some people talking about it today, including Joel Corey from CBS, who used to be an agent, who was saying, look, all the Kirk trade stuff is fodder, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for them to trade Kirk Cousins. I think that that's over for the next how many days until they play the Chiefs. If they do not upset the Chiefs at home, that starts to come back. Certainly, if they go to Chicago and play like this, Justin Fields is good enough to beat them if he has a good day. We've seen him have good days, and we've seen this team have bad days at Soldier Field. So I guess in my mind, going to 1-3, beating the Panthers, doesn't really change a thing about how I feel about this team or how long of a road it's going to be in order for them to get truly back in a playoff race.
No, it doesn't do that for me either. Basically, all they did today was do what they were supposed to, and in a lot of ways get bailed out by a rookie quarterback who the game looks too big for right now. You're supposed to win this game. You're supposed to win the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game in the season opener at home, and you don't. So there's improvement that exists there. You won the game you were supposed to win. I guess that's improvement, and that steps in the right direction. I don't think the Vikings have to apologize for the way they won the game, because they ended up getting the victory in the end. But I think it would be wise of them to think, all right, well, the season's back on track, because there were so many things that happened today that if they happen next week against the Kansas City Chiefs, you will get blown out. The fact that I don't think the comments are wrong. The fact that Andy Dalton could play today and you probably lose should not be something that this game shouldn't necessarily be celebrated. All you did today was kind of take care of business and make sure that the conversations of blow it all up, tank, let's go get Caleb Williams, that dies for about a week. But it's right back on if you get blown out next week at home and you're 1-4. So maybe that's what they can lock onto, is that like we actually get to talk about a football game this week, rather than are the Vikings going to blow it up? Should they blow it up? Wow, the Desmond Ridder looked really bad in Atlanta today. Is there going to be a bidding war between Atlanta and New York? I'm assuming Zach Wilson's going to look bad tonight at home against the Chiefs. We're recording this obviously before it drops, or before that game is played. All of those conversations would have existed if you lose to the Carolina Panthers today, which the Vikings didn't. But yeah, this is kind of just a way of saying my opinion on what this team can do hasn't necessarily changed based on the outcome of today. And I don't think anyone's opinion on what this team can do should change based on the outcome of today.
Yeah, this was very much, it wasn't even a survive and advance. It was just survive. Like, your season is not officially over at 0-4. It would have been. And now there's more time. And look, I mean, we have seen many upsets in the NFL. There's no question that there's going to be a huge favorite for Kansas City. I mean, a huge, they're going to be favored by a lot. And most people will think that they'll win, and you never know. But that's kind of where we're at, is still after this game saying you never know. Not saying, wow, the way they played against Carolina, I'm so much more confident that they're going to just go steamroll, because there were just so many things about this game where you went, I don't know. What am I supposed to think here? Like, yeah, they can run the ball more effectively. Yeah, Davenport helps the defense. But it was an 8-point win, another one-score game. I was wrong. I shot my shot this week, Dane. I tried predicting that the Vikings would win by 20. And even when they were still losing, I was watching Carolina play and still tweeting, they're winning by 20. This team is so bad. They're struggling, and you had to figure there was a Bryce Young disaster coming, and it did. Mm-hmm. But the fact that it is just remarkable to me that this team can never close anybody out. I just never, ever close anybody out. Even when you've got the opportunity after the Wanham thing, you get the ball back, you just convert a couple first downs, go down and score. The Panthers defense is banged up. One of their top corners was in the injury tent at one point in this game. I mean, this is a team that if you're any good, you just smash their face in and then move along. It's just very hard to be like, oh, wow. I mean, they're rolling here. And I'm also starting to think, and I want your opinion on this, Dane, because turnovers are absolutely luck driven. There's no question that is proven. But also, if you turn the ball over every week, all the time, because your guards get beat, because your quarterback is staring people down, that's more than just fumbles, and turnovers might be a staple of who this team is. It would not be the first Kirk season that was marred by strip sacks or marred by interceptions. We've seen that in the past. And I don't know, it's just hard to convince me that like it's all just completely random.
Yeah. And before I make this point, I want to make sure I note that like fumbles are bad too. Like I'm what I'm about to say does not like absolve guilt when someone fumbles the ball. But 2 weeks ago, we're sitting in the press box in Philadelphia, and we're talking about the game they fumbled 4 times. 3 of those fumbles felt a bit random. Brandon Powell going to the ground, ball gets punched out. Alexander Mattison, who didn't fumble today, so that's an improvement, gets punched out late. I forget what the other fumble was. But it just sometimes with fumbles, it's luck based, in my opinion. Because if you just fall on the ball, it's your ball, and no one even thinks about the fumble. But the one fumble we talked about from that game that was repeatable was the strip sack. And that's how I feel about the turnovers today. This is my roundabout point. The one turnover we talked about 2 weeks ago against the Philadelphia Eagles was the other 3 felt a bit random. If the Vikings fall on the ball, you don't remember them. But Josh Sweat coming off the edge, beating Ole Udoh, stripping the ball from Kirk Cousins and the Eagles taking over deep in enemy territory. Well, that one feels repeatable because we've seen that movie before. The 2 turnovers today, we've seen this movie before. The interception that Kirk threw at the goal line, it's because he's late to the flat. It's because he's late to the flat, and he in his mind he's thinking before he gets the ball, before he steps under center and snaps the ball, well, the flat's going to be there, and the flat was there if he threw it on time, but he was late. His mind was programmed that I'm going to throw the flat. He throws the flats, pick 6. He said after the game, if I wait another 1, 2, 3 seconds, because I think he had time, TJ Hawkinson's going to pop open. But he saw the safety get hands on TJ Hawkinson. He threw to, kind of his pre-programmed read into the flat, and it went 99 yards the other way. That feels repeatable because that's kind of who Kirk Cousins is. Like, he makes these decisions that at times make you scratch your head and say, like, what is going on there? So that one felt repeatable. The pick where Kirk's arm gets hit and the ball pops into the air, that one feels repeatable because you continue to start Ed Ingram at your right guard. So yeah, the turnovers might just be a part of this team's DNA because of the personnel that they have, because of who they trot out onto the field each week. Like, the fumbles are one thing. If you fall on them, they don't count. I get why the Vikings made such a big deal heading into the Chargers game about buying this piece of equipment and that piece of equipment, because, like, what else are you going to do when you can't hold on to the ball? But in some ways, that felt like that was just going to regress to the mean, and, like, some of these balls, they just weren't going to fumble or they were going to fall on. But some of these turnovers concern me. It's the ones that kind of start and stop with the starting quarterback, because he's shown he's prone to turn the ball over throughout his career. We saw 2 today. 1, 100% his fault. 2, probably more Ed Ingram's fault, but I would still argue if you're Kirk Cousins, like, get rid of the ball. It's okay. Like, you don't have to wait until the very last second and try and make a throw that might not have been there anyway. It was Jordan Addison on a wheel. So yeah, like, the quarterback turnovers concern me because that's kind of who Kirk Cousins has proven to be at times throughout his career. And they feel a lot more repeatable. And until they stop turning the ball over, this is kind of who this team is. They've turned the ball 11 times through the first 4 weeks of the season. And I don't know if there's an end in sight.
Very funny, though, today, because exactly what you're saying. Terrace Marshall fumbles the ball and it bounces right back into his hands. But also, Kevin O'Connell didn't throw the red hanky, and he should have, because Dean Blandino came on TV, and this is no guarantee, of course, and said it would have been an incompletion. So I think they missed an opportunity there. But it's amazing not only that the Vikings have fumbled this much, but also how many times the opponent has recovered their own fumbles. Mm-hmm. That the Vikings, I believe, have won out of maybe like 5 fumbles by the other team. So yes, the good way to put it is not all, but some. It's always been a feature of Kirk Cousins' play that there's the big sack, the strip sack, the interception that can be costly when you get the bad version of Kirk. So they will come home to Kansas City. We'll have a grand time leading into the game, Vikings and Chiefs, because it is suddenly meaningful. And the way I look at it, Dane, is in order to have a season, in order to get into the playoff race, they need an upset either this week or against San Francisco. And then you can talk me into it. But without upsetting one of these 2 teams, it's going to be a heck of a lot harder. So we'll see where this goes. I think overall, this will be a game that as soon as people leave their houses to mow the lawn, to go to, whatever, dinner tonight, they will have forgotten out of their minds. This was one of the most forgettable games I think I can remember over the last number of years. And even weirdly, even though they're driving, I never felt like it was going to be in the end zone. And I just thought this game's probably over. So a weird one, but I'm glad that you were there in Charlotte to cover it. We'll be back at US Bank Stadium in our normal perch for next week after Vikings and Chiefs. And of course, here on the show, every single day, we are live every night here on the YouTube channel. And of course, all those go to the podcast feed. So thanks everybody for watching and playing along in the comment section. And thank you, Dane, for taking the time there in the press box to do the show. And I will see you out at TCO Performance Center tomorrow. Thanks, man.
Sounds good.